There is no doubt that any of us knowing the history of the site we visit adds a completely different atmosphere to the experience, but sometimes the frightening history of some sites makes people avoid visiting them. For example, when you sit in an apartment, for example, and you know that someone killed or committed suicide there, even if you are one of those who reject the atmosphere of goblins, curses, and other scary stories and tales, but we naturally prefer to avoid places that witnessed frightening events or bloody accidents, especially since we are talking about really real events and some of the islands in the world. And despite the natural beauty that you enjoy, there are very enough possible reasons not to panic about them. And in this episode, we will talk about terrifying islands. Never visit them. Welcome to the Random Tales channel. But before anything, do not forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and like the video as encouragement and for the spread of the video, and to offer you more interesting videos. Despite its beauty and its close proximity to the Gulf of Naples in Italy, the locals used to avoid Gaiola Island for fear of becoming new victims of its evil curse. Bad luck and death have not been associated with anyone who buys them or thinks of sitting in them. The island's curse dates back to the early 19th century, when a hermit known as the Magician was isolated on its land, and he was living thanks to the charity of fishermen who used to visit him constantly. But suddenly, and without any introductions, the man disappeared without any trace from the island and from the whole area, alive he was or even dead. And in the 20s of the 20th century, the island was owned by the Swiss Hans Braun, who lived in a house on the island with his wife. And one day he was found murdered and wrapped in a carpet without any evidence of the killer or the cause of the crime. And a little later his wife was found drowned in the waters near the island. The owner who saw them was a German who had a heart attack and died while he was on the island. The owner who saw him committed suicide after he went insane and entered a mental hospital in Switzerland. The one who followed him was a German businessman who had a giant factory for the steel industry, but shortly after buying the island he declared bankruptcy. Among the well-known owners of the island throughout its history full of disasters was the famous Italian Gianni Agnelli, the former president of Juventus and the main shareholder in Fiat automobile companies. Despite his successes on the professional level, he faced severe calamities on the personal level, whether in the suicide of his son or the death of his nephew of a rare form of cancer at the age of 33. And among the famous people who bought the island was the American billionaire J. Paul Getty. And this man suffered from the death of his youngest son and the suicide of his eldest son, in addition to the kidnapping of his grandson. And all this after he bought the cursed island. Currently, the island is considered part of a marine reserve in the region under government administration. If you see that these events are normal and can happen to anyone, whether they buy the island or not, the Italians see that the issue is more than a mere coincidence. Roanoke Island. Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina, USA, also known as Lost Colony Island, is one of the strangest and most terrifying mysteries in history. This island was the site of an English settlement in 1587 AD that included about 120 men, women, and children. At that time, the island was not deserted or needed, but some of the indigenous people of the Americas lived on it, but the relationship between them and the English was not in the best condition, and this process made it difficult for the lives of the people of the settlement, especially with the constant shortage of resources. At the end of 1587, the governor of the colony, John White, decided that he would travel to Britain to provide the necessary resources for the population, especially with the presence of children among them. But because of the imminent war at the time with the Spaniards, White did not know that he would return to the island until 3 years later, and here he remained. It was the surprise. Upon his arrival to the island in the year 1590, White was surprised that the colony had disappeared from the face of the earth, as there was no trace of its population of more than 100 people, neither alive nor dead, nor even traces of fighting, blood, or anything that indicated the fate of its people. men, women, or even children. And until today, after more than 400 years, the answer to the mystery of their disappearance, like the colony, is still missing, and no one can find it. Bikini Islands. Although most of the world's islands are seen as a symbol of the beauty and charm of nature, the Bikini Atoll is a living witness to the ugliness of the Earth's inhabitants and the cruelty of its people. The islands located in the Pacific Ocean were chosen by the United States of America in 1946 to be the site of its nuclear tests in the early era of the Cold War, and over the course of 12 years, it conducted 23 nuclear explosions in the region on the land of the islands and in the waters surrounding them. And these experiments resulted in the complete disappearance of 3 islands from on the face of the Earth. Unlike the radiation that completely covered the lands of the islands, the strange thing remained that these islands, known as the Bikini Atoll, were not deserted islands, for example. There were no human beings on them. No, there were a large number of families living their lives in peace on hunting and grazing for many years, and the people were forced to leave their land and their homeland and go out in order to give the Americans the opportunity to do their experiments in safety. Some families of the people of the island and their descendants decided to return to their homeland again in the 70s, but the tests confirmed the high percentage of radiation left by the experiments in the region, and until today people are still afraid to approach the lands of the islands or even the waters surrounding them for fear of exposure to any cancerous diseases. Norfolk Island. In the south of the Pacific Ocean, a small Australian island of extreme beauty is located, called Norfolk Island. Despite its beauty, it was known in the past as the Pacific Hell, and the fact that whoever got this island makes it deserve the name well. In the 20s of the 19th century, the island was chosen for the second time by Great Britain to return as a penal colony for the worst criminals ever, and whoever was entering this island from among the convicts was losing any hope of getting out of it again. He took advantage of the officials of the imprisoned colony to force them to work the hardship on the island in agricultural work, road building, etc., and they used to be chained in heavy chains throughout the work period. And the punishment of the convicts varied between flogging and solitary confinement, which sometimes drove its companions to the point of insanity. Hatred, for example. No, but with the aim of obtaining a death sentence and ridding themselves of the torment of life in the hell of the island. It was rumored on the island that the ghosts of the prisoners who died on its land are still there today, and they are trying to take revenge for what happened to them. And the stories were repeated about unusual activities that happened there, such as hearing screams at night and seeing ghosts and others, attracting tourists to visit it and making sure of the reality of the strange activities on its land. And annually, it is visited by nearly 30,000 tourists who are amateurs in search of thrills and hunting ghosts. Hart Island. According to a number of reports, it is likely that more than 1 million human beings died in deep pits on the American Hart Island. The island known as the Island of the Dead was in the past the site of a drug rehabilitation center, a prison, and a quarantine area for yellow fever patients, and over the years it was discovered more than 85,000 bodies are in mass graves on the island, and entry to it is prohibited, except for people who have relatives buried on it. Even countries need permits before entering, and many Americans see that the island is inhabited because of the huge number of dead people on its land. Poveglia Island. Less than a kilometer from the city of Venice in Italy, there is a small island called Poveglia Island. This island was the last refuge for plague patients during the rule of the Roman Empire, and hundreds of thousands of patients breathed their last on its land. And in the 18th century, it was used once again as a quarantine for plague patients and other serious diseases, and due to the large number of deaths on the island, the bodies that were not burned were buried in mass graves, and it is said that the soil of the island includes 50% of the ashes of the victims. And in 1922, a mental hospital was built on the island, and it became famous. The hospital reports that its doctors perform frightening experiments on patients, including a doctor who committed suicide by jumping from the top of the hospital, with reports saying that he himself went insane because of the ghosts chasing him on the island. Miyake-jima Island, 180 kilometers southeast of Tokyo, one of the strangest islands in the world, is located at all, which is the island of Miyake-jima, or the island of gas masks. It is volcanic, but it is inhabited, and its people refuse to leave it even with the horror they live in. But in the year 2000, and with the eruption of the Oyama volcano, there was no escape for their lives with the amount of volcanic ash that covered the entire area. And after their return to the island again, it became necessary everyone has to take a gas mask with him all the time, in case he wears it if the level of fumes rises in the air. And as soon as the alarm siren is heard on the island, the residents put on the gas mask immediately and at the moment. And it is the siren that they are used to hearing constantly. And despite the preventive measures, chest diseases are widespread among citizens, especially among young people. Thus, we have talked today about the terrifying islands. Do not visit them. What would you like to talk about in the upcoming videos? Write to us in the comments, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell button, and support us with admiration for the video to encourage us. See you soon.